Hey friends, if you're anything like me, there are days where you just bang out song idea after song idea and you're just flowing. But then of course there are other days where you just got nothing. Since we can't control when that precious flow occurs, instead we need to come up with strategies to get us inspired. Fortunately, Ableton provides some unique ways to create chord progressions that can completely turn your creative day around. So without further ado, here are 5 methods that you've likely not tried before that can yield great riffs, and the best part is that you don't need any pre-existing ideas, any keyboard skills, or even any music theory. Let's go. Okay, so let's get into the first method, and that's using Ableton Pitch. So I'm going to grab a pitch and put it onto an instrument track. So obviously, a track that can play chords. Now, in case you're within one of the two scenarios where either you don't know how to play chords on a keyboard, or 2, you don't have inspiration today, you can go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and record just some random presses of keys. Right? So, terrible, right? But thanks to Ableton adding their scale aware system, all I have to do is click this little button right here, and all of a sudden all the notes that are being played into the pitch device will come out within whatever scale I've chose. So let's go ahead and choose maybe E minor, and now listen to those same 4 chords. Now, this chord progression might not be the final product, but it's definitely more pleasing to listen to, right? Let's go into the chord progression, and let's go ahead and clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to delete this note. Maybe I'll make the notes last a bit longer by pulling out right here. Now, zooming in here, we can see that there are notes sitting on this piano roll that are outside of our scale that's highlighted in purple. But I think the point is not to get too caught up in the weeds. Something that you can do that's really fun here is you can experiment with moving some notes around to kind of get this maybe to sound a little bit more exciting. So that's not bad right here, these first 2 chords, but this third one's kind of boring. Now, if I make sure my little headphone icon is on, I can listen to these notes as I move them around. And these notes that I'm listening to will be filtered through the scale-aware system. So maybe that would be better. Yeah, that's better. So now let's take a listen. Now, another thing you can do is you can take entire groups of notes and then drag them down until you get a chord that you like, and you can listen to it as you go. Cool, so now let's listen to our whole progression. So that's one approach. Another approach is to simply know what rhythm you want the chords to do, but maybe you don't know exactly what notes they're going to be. Check this out. So I'll go ahead and record just a rhythm of chords without changing where my fingers are. Okay, so I know I have this chord progression that's so amazing, right? Something we can do instead is I'm going to double click on the track title so I can get back to pitch. Now, when you have pitch in scale aware mode, you can click on this knob right here. And what this does is this automates the pitch scale degrees. Okay, if you have this off, what this automates is the semitones. But if you have this on, you'll notice that it says SD. So I can go into here and I can actually shift this around. And something that's so interesting about this is that we can generate a chord progression based on the position of the scale degree knob. So clicking on the scale degree knob, we can see this switch over to this grid mode, and now I can move this around a little bit. So all I'm doing is just changing the position of this. Now take a listen. Right? So maybe those are the chords I want, maybe not. Right, so we just played the same notes, and all we're doing is we're shifting the scale degrees around, and what that's doing is it's not just pitching the chords up and down, it's pitching the chords up and down, and then filing away the different sharps and flats within E minor in this case. By the way, if you're gaining useful knowledge here, please consider subscribing to my channel and ringing the little bell icon so you know when I post new videos. So one further point is that if you have a note melody within the chord, it will also do that. So let's go ahead and record maybe a chord progression with a note melody. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so I just played the same thing over and over again, and anybody can do that. You can just put your fingers on a keyboard, right, and then play a series of notes within rhythm, right? So now what I can do is I can go in here and I can change the scale degrees yet again. And remember, what this is going to do is it's going to file those notes away into different sharps and flats depending upon the scale that I chose. So I just chose, I don't know what this is going to sound like, but I just chose some random scale degree shifts. Let's take a listen. Maybe this one would be better like that. And maybe one more thing to point out. Let's go ahead and grab a Midi monitor. Slapping a Midi monitor before and after this pitch, you can really see what's happening here. So you can see that I'm just playing random. So yeah, you could just noodle around until you come up with something that you like, right? Okay, let's move on to another method. So I'll delete this pitch and let's grab an Ableton chord. So what's interesting about chord, I'm going to go ahead and delete this clip here. What's interesting about chord is that it's also scale aware. If you click this button right here, you'll notice that we go from seeing semitones to, of course, seeing scale degrees. So this is sort of like pitch sort of blown out a little bit. And what's cool about this is that if I click up a couple of these values right here, let's maybe try 2, 4, and 6. What's going to happen is I'm going to play a single note, and if we look at our Midi monitors, a single note will now yield us chords, right? So let's go ahead and record something. So I did a bunch of different chords here because I kind of want to illustrate this point. One note can now yield us a bunch of different chords within the scale that we chose, right? Obviously, we can't see, when we go into this piano roll, we can't see those chords that we're making, but it's just as simple as going into here, creating a new MIDI track, for example, and feeding the input from this track. So I can say, all right, I want 8 whirly V3, right? I'm choosing that right here. And now I can record the chords that are being output. Now, obviously, when I play this track, nothing's going to happen, right? That's because my instrument is living up here. So it's just as simple as if I want to, I can delete this MIDI clip, delete my chord, and then I can just drag this up here, and then we can hear it. Right, so that's a way that you can extract the full MIDI. And why would you want to do that? Well, I like to think of the chord progressions that we're coming up with here as what you might consider to be vanilla, right? As in, there's no accidentals, there's no flavor. So how can you add flavor? Well, let's go ahead and we're going to delete this track. Let's turn our chord back on and go through this process one more time, but this time with the intention of eventually adding some accidentals. So let's go ahead. All right, so let's say that that is now my chord progression, so I can go ahead and record that output. So now I've got my chord progression here. I'll go ahead and delete this clip. Let's drag this one up here and turn off my chord device. So now I can go into here, and these are now movable notes. Okay, even though this clip has a scale associated with it, we can add accidentals by simply dragging notes out of the original chord progression. Right, so by moving this one note up a little bit, we've added a different flavor to this chord progression, adding a different style of resolve and a different style of movement, right? So it's just as simple as recording the output of chord, dragging it back into the track with your instrument in it, and then moving a note around to get a different sort of flavor, right? And another cool thing I should say about this is that this can teach you things about music. Something that I love about the scale-aware system is it doesn't take necessarily the reins completely away from you. It gives you the agency to sort of understand what it is that you're actually doing. And implementing these things is just so incredible. So real quick, if you're gaining knowledge from this video and you enjoy how I teach, consider joining one or all of my Ableton online courses. I'll always post useful videos here on YouTube, but within my 4 main Ableton courses, I expound upon these and hundreds of other music production strategies that can take your music from entry level to professional results. There are now over 150 hours and growing of video content just like this, and my consistent 5-star reviews speak for themselves. Whether you decide to learn from me or another teacher, please consider your education before you waste any more money on buying any more plugins. Okay. Let's get back to it. And so with that same idea, let's go ahead and look at our next approach, and that's using, of course, Expressive Chords, which I'm not going to dive into very deeply because we've already been here. But if you didn't realize, a lot of folks I see are dragging Expressive Chords into Ableton without knowing that it comes with a bunch of presets. So if you find it via search, you're not going to see those. At least you're not going to see those in the same way that you would see them if you delete this and instead you go into Midi effects and click on the down arrow of Expressive Chords, and there are some really awesome chord progressions within here. So grabbing one like Neo Gospel, for example, this is going to be chock full of those accidentals, those notes that are outside of standard scales. So going with that theme, let's go ahead and listen to the result here. Now, something that can happen sometimes when you're messing with Expressive Chord is that these chords were played within a certain range, and potentially your instrument doesn't sound the best within that range. Okay, so that's why this control right here exists. So what this does is it transposes the entire thing up. What it sounded like to me is that the Wurlitzer doesn't necessarily want to be played in that range. It's a little low, and if I tried to blend that with bass instruments and stuff like that, I would be fighting it the whole way. So I'm going to transpose this up maybe 5 semitones, and now we get a more usable range, right? So with our MIDI monitors out, we can see that single notes are yielding different chords, right? All right, so that's something. Let's go ahead and record that. Okay, so again, we can use that same track we used before and record the chords out of it. Right? And then drag it into the track, turn off whatever MIDI device, and then we can go in here and edit it. And so now it's living in here, and I can edit it, I can change notes, I can do whatever I want with it, right? Okay, let's look at our next method. And this deals more with a clip. So let's go ahead and make a clip. I'll select this area, Shift, Controller, Command M. Let's go into here and let's look at some of the MIDI tools. So opening the Generate tab, we can go down to Stacks. So what Stacks does is it literally creates a chord progression for you. All right, so, and of course, if you have your auto switch on, it's going to just automatically generate. Now you can choose different types of chords. Let's go ahead and choose kind of a major 7. And another thing we can do is we can invert the chords, meaning that we're just going to shift the order up and down the octaves. Let's just do one with the first inversion. Now, what you can do is you can hit this plus sign, and this will add a second chord. But that second chord is, see how it's highlighted? We can change. We can change the root note and the type of chord, right? Right? And it's going to be scale aware. It's within the scale that we have. Now, another thing we can do is we can add 2 more, right? And we can change these. Cool. And let's go ahead and we'll choose this one and maybe... Now, of course, there's no style here. Stacks is just kind of, on a grid making you chords, right? But you can now take these chords and you can bend this chord progression into what you might want. So now I've changed the rhythm. And another thing I can do is that this is just, all that this has done is it's just laid the chords out onto my piano roll. So of course I can change things about this. You know, maybe I want that note like that. Right? So I can go ahead and edit this too. Now, of course, because this wasn't played by hands, it's very robotic. So, something else we could do is we could select all of this, and we could go to pitch and time, for example, and click on humanize. And this will sort of, shift some of the beginnings and the ends of it. We can turn up the percentage of that to kind of make it more human. And another thing we could do is we could go into transform, and we could choose strum, for example, and maybe strum these chords a bit this way. Right? So we can turn this into maybe more of something that was played by a person, right? Cool, so let's look at an even more strange way to make a chord progression. I'll go ahead and just delete this track here, and let's grab an Ableton Meld. So within Meld, we actually have a chord machine. Now what's cool about the chord machine, I'll go ahead and turn off the B voice for now. What's cool about the chord machine is that you can choose from a bunch of different chords with the shape, and then with inversion, you can actually smoothly invert the chords, or in other words, it crossfades between different chord voicings, and it's just so cool. I mean, and another thing that I really like about this is that they chose to use saw waveforms, because saw waveforms are very high harmonic, right? So they're great for filtering. It's a very versatile sound to start with, right? So the way that you would use this is similar to when we use the chord device, and you simply could, play a single rhythm and then come up with a bunch of different chords that way. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's say that that is the rhythm that I want, right? So the next thing I would do is I can go into here, and I can change the shape, of course, to choose different chords. And let's go ahead and take advantage of these controls. Let's go ahead and use them in their creative capacity. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to smoothly invert up and down here. And then I'll go back to shape, and I'll choose a different chord for this part. So another thing we can do is we can copy engine A to engine B, for example. And again, playing into the strengths of this, let's go ahead and we're also going to copy the automation of the shape, because what that's going to do is it's going to apply the chord, the same chord, to both of these machines. But instead, what we can do with our inversion is we can do different inversions. Maybe we'll go something like this, just to make this different. And of course, because Meld is so fun, we can go ahead and pan these left and right, and now we'll get maybe an interesting... So there's a lot of creative potential here using this chord machine. And again, because it's a saw waveform, you can filter it to your heart's content and get a lot of really interesting results. Word, well, thanks for watching, everybody. If you've got other ideas for creating chord progressions, I'd love to read them down in the comments. Please subscribe if you haven't yet, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.